As I announced earlier, please put your name and your organization in the chat box. And this session is going to be recorded. So if you're not comfortable showing your video, feel free to turn off your camera. But we do have time for a question and answer at the end. So we'll get started. First, we're going to introduce the speakers that we have today. As I mentioned, that I'm Grace Chan McKibben. We also have Karen Kandambi from the Voting Rights and Democracy Project at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus, which is Asian Americans Advancing Justice's national organization. And we have Justin Sia, who's the Democracy, Voting Rights, and Redistricting Council at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. And then we have Derek Lau, Program Assistant for Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community. Next slide. Today's goal is to talk about how we can make Chinatown fairly represented on a ward map by having the greater Chinatown area in one ward. Currently is split up in different wards, and we would like the Chinatown area, the Chinese Americans that are on the southwest side of Chicago, to be in one ward, one district, represented by one alderperson. Next slide. This is a brief history of Chinatown redistricting. Asian Americans is the fastest growing racial group, and over the past 30 years, Asian Americans has grown a lot in the greater Chinatown area. The Chinese American population, or the Asian American population, mostly Chinese, has grown in the greater Chinatown area, more than doubled in the past 3 decades. And Chinatown has been active in redistricting. And some of these highlights are listed on the slide. CBCAC itself has been actively redistricting working on redistricting efforts since 2001. Since 2001. You can see that new generations of community activists are added in each round, ensuring that there's continued energy and momentum. So first, in 1991, that's really the beginning of the significance and impact of redistricting on the Chinatown community. Previous to 1991, there really was not that much activity, and people were not recognizing how important redistricting is. In 2001, there was the first ever City Council redistricting hearing held in Chinatown with an unprecedented turnout. And redistricting happens the year after census. And so these are the years that the activities happen. 10 years ago in 2011, CBCAC together with legislators were instrumental in ensuring the passage of the Voting Rights Act of Illinois 2011. That Voting Rights Act ensures that communities of interest are kept together, even if they do not constitute a majority of a voting district. So that led to 90% of the Chinese population drawn into a single state legislative district, and that remains one single state rep district, where we have a majority Latinx and minority Asian American district, but 90% of the Asian Americans are drawn into that district. At the same time, at the city ward remapping process, we were not able to get the Asian Americans redistricted into one ward. So the Asian Americans continue to be split among various different wards in the Chinatown and surrounding areas, even though in 2011, there was broad recognition and support both from elected officials, or some elected officials, and from the general public. So now in 2021, right after the census data has been released, we can see the possibility of a majority Asian ward because the census numbers do support it. And we do need, as we can see, we need continued effort, a broad-based and robust community engagement and support in order to draw a majority Asian ward. The city council has to pass the new map by December 31, 2021. In fact, they have to introduce an ordinance no later than December 1st for a new map. And in this process, the new map needs to have a supporting vote from 41 out of the 50 alder people to pass a new map. Otherwise, the proposal needs to go to vote by referendum, which means being voted on by the entire city of Chicago's voters. So this is a brief history of the redistricting. Let's go on to the numbers. So I just mentioned that we have a historic opportunity to draw a majority Asian American ward this time, and the 2020 census numbers support this. This 2020 census data that has just been released contains Asian American and other ethnic group data, but not, I'm sorry, other racial group data, but not ethnic specific data. So we have data for Asian American population, but not for Chinese American, Indian, Pakistani, Korean, etc. So what we can see is that in Chicago, the Asian alone numbers had increased from 147,000 in 2010 to 192,000 in 2020. And this is a 5.4% to over 7% increase in a decade. And then in Illinois, Asian Americans alone increased from 587,000 in 2010 to 755,000 in 2020. And this represents an increase from 4.6% to 5.9% in 10 years. Next slide. The growth in Chinese population, this is from previous American Community Service survey data. 1990, the Chinese population in the greater Chinatown area, Chinatown and surrounding areas was about 12,000. In 2000 is 18,000. In 2010 is 27,000. In 2020, we estimate that that number is over 35,000. But again, as I mentioned before, right now we have the Asian American data, but not yet the sub-Asian group disaggregated data. Next slide. Currently, the Chinese Asian American population in the greater Chinatown area is divided in representation. We're represented by 3 congressional reps in Congresswoman Marie Newman's district, 3rd, Congressman Shui Garcia's district, 4th, and in the 7th congressional district by Congressman Danny Davis. The congressional redistricting process has not yet started in Illinois, and we will be putting forth some similar efforts in trying to advocate for having Asian Americans mostly grouped into one congressional district. In Cook County, that process has already been almost completed. The proposed map has been drawn, and we continue to be divided between the 2nd district, the 7th district, and the 11th district, and that would be Cook County Commissioner Dennis Steer, Alma Anaya, and John Daly. In that process, we are not actively working on it, even though we know that in the new map, we continue to be divided. At the state level, we actually had been successful in keeping 90% of the Asian Americans still in one state rep district, and that map has been approved as well. At this, what we want to talk about today is at the Chicago ward level, and that's what we'll be focusing on really very intensely between now and December 1st, when the City Council has to approve has to introduce an ordinance with a new map. Currently, the Chinatown area, the greater Chinatown area, meaning the Asian American population, mostly Chinese Americans in the Chinatown and surrounding areas, are divided into 3 wards. We're split into 11th ward, represented represented by Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson, the 25th Ward represented by Byron Sucho Lopez, and the 12th Ward represented by George Cardenas. Next slide. So that's a quick overview of redistricting. So we want to know, out of the folks that are here, how familiar do you think you are with redistricting? And if you want to just put in numbers in the chat or.
Yes, thank you, Grace. So it'd be great really to have you all just kind of let us know how comfortable you feel with redistricting and the process. So it'd be great to kind of gauge that. So we see some numbers coming in. Okay, so some of you are pretty new to redistricting and some of you are pretty well versed. So that's a good chance to hear. So some of the information that we'll present next might be a little bit familiar. And then as we move along to more specifically to Chicago and how redistricting impacts there might be some questions there. So always feel free to send some questions through the chat and we'll go ahead and answer those for you. So awesome, great. So next slide. So redistricting, so just a quick 101 on redistricting. So redistricting, as mandated by the US Constitution, happens every 10 years following the decennial census. So with this, the data that is collected from the census for each state will help draw proportionate voting districts for anywhere from the congressional level all the way down to city and school board level. So this impacts several different voting districts for all of us. So depending on the demographic numbers that are collected from the decennial census could really impact how the lines are drawn, and at the congressional level really impact whether each state could potentially either gain, keep, or lose current congressional seats. So in this photo, there's a quick example of what redistricting could look like. And so in the first square, we see that, for example, those census numbers came in and we see that in this community, 60% of community members are blue and the other 40% are red. So in the examples to the right, you see two potential opportunities for how lines could be drawn. And in the middle one, we see that all the lines are drawn equally into 5 separate districts, where we see an equal amount of reds and blues in each of the 5. This, however, we can see is a disproportionate, where the blues have more representation than reds, allowing for a greater opportunity for blues to have more sway, right? And then on the right hand, on the final third one, we see how the lines were also drawn into 5 different districts, but completely in kind of restructured ways, where it allows for certain districts to have more representation in some than others. So these are different ways that lines could be drawn, and it's really important that when we're talking through redistricting that we think about our communities, the demographics and the numbers that make them up, and what makes sense in order for it to be an equitable representation of our communities. Next slide. So gerrymandering. So what is gerrymandering? So gerrymandering is when district lines are drawn in a way that favors one group over the other. So in the previous slide, we saw the maps and how they were drawn to favor either the blue population or the red population. So gerrymandering is a method in which allows politicians to choose their voters instead of letting the voters choose them. This is also a way that impacts minority groups, in which it disproportionately impacts their ability to receive adequate representation. So on the right, you see a map. This is actually a map from North Carolina as an example, where we see that their 12th congressional district was drawn in such a way that kind of excluded certain individuals, whereas the 1st congressional district was drawn in a way that kind of encompasses certain communities. So this map was actually brought up to the Supreme Court in their state because of gerrymandering. So it's really important to understand that in this process, as organizations looking out for this process, that we do want to avoid any form of gerrymandering that can impact our communities. And through through our Constitution, there's actually implementations of the Voting Rights Act in place to prevent that from happening. And yeah, so our partner Justin will talk more about some of those protocols that help protect our communities and their representation. So why does this happen? So the redistricting, so gerrymandering and how lines are drawn, why does it happen is that this is a really good example. So picture a soccer field. So currently the soccer field is fair. However, the winner of this game gets to decide how the next game is played. So if they wanted to, they could tilt the field to be in their favor. So this is an example for here in Illinois. The process is currently run by the state legislator and those in office. So it's really important to think about, you know, who currently is a part of this process and how do we implement advocacy to ensure that this tilting, right, doesn't happen, that could impact our community's advocacy and ability to push for the needs of our, you know, whether it's our city or even at the state level. And so some of the power struggles among alders and mayors have been fought over the right to how to tilt the field, which has led to the incumbent bias visible in politics today. So many of you maybe have seen this, especially if you live in Chinatown in the last few decades, maybe how the lines have changed, how it's been impacting your neighborhood. And so this is why it's critical that we get involved in the redistricting process. Next slide.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Karen, for that presentation. And so I'm going to briefly talk to you about how the law intersects with redistricting. And so very quickly, what you see on your screen is a brief description of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Specifically, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is the one that dictates how redistricting should go, specifically preventing discrimination against minority voters. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was created in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement to ensure that minority voters, such as Asian Americans, are able to exercise their right to vote, in that in the redistricting process, their votes are not diluted, just like in the way that Karen had talked about. And one example that we continuously talk about and that is applied to Chinatown is the concept of cracking. Cracking is the idea of splitting a minority group into 2 or more voting districts so that the minority vote does not have as much influence as it would have if it were all in one ward. And as Grace had talked about earlier, Chinatown is currently split into 2 or 3 wards, right? That is 25, 11, and Ward 12. And so the Voting Rights Act would be concerned with an example like Chinatown. And finally, I wanted to note that the Voting Rights Act does say that if in certain circumstances, and if it is possible to draw a majority minority district where the minority population, such as Asian Americans, is able to be over 50% in a certain voting district, then the voting district that could be created must be created under the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. And these are just some very, very high level overview of what the redistricting law looks like here in Chicago. And the law is very simple. The law says that there first must be 50 wards, just like you see on the map. The map that you see on your screen is the current breakdown of the wards across Chicago. This was created in 2010. There must be 50 wards. There cannot be 49 wards or 51 wards. There must only be 50. And each ward must represent around 55,000 people. That's because the total population in Chicago is divided by 50, and each ward must represent around the same number of people, more or less, but mostly aiming for around 55,000, specifically 54,900. And maybe the most, one of the most important parts that you all should walk away with today is understanding that the redistricting process is mostly a closed door process. There are public hearings, as Grace talked about earlier, and Grace will talk about later. However, mostly the redistricting process occurs when alderpersons meet privately and talk to each other about how they want to divide up their communities and how they want to draw their wards on the map. Most of the time to benefit themselves or benefit a specific or work toward a specific goal. But again, the point is that alderpersons usually draw this in a closed door process, which is why it is so important for our community to be involved today, to speak out publicly and work with alderpersons aggressively to ensure that the Asian American need for, or excuse me, the need for an Asian American ward is heard. And finally, as Grace had mentioned earlier, City Council must eventually pass a map with 41 votes, not more, or excuse me, not less, by December 1st, 2021. And if the City Council is unable to reach 41 votes on one specific map, the whole city will be able to vote in a referendum on which map they think is best for the entire Chicago. So it is very important that, like I said, we exert as much influence as possible because of the closed door process. And we are also working very aggressively because the deadline of December 1st is coming very quickly. And that's all for me on this slide.
Great. And this is why hosting these presentations are really critical, is that we want to get your input, especially many of you who live in the Chinatown area, understand your neighborhood the best. And so as part of today's presentation, we really want to have you all help us really advocate, right, for an equitable map. So we're going to do a little bit of an activity where Derek will pull up what we call is a Jamboard, but basically it's a slide with a couple questions, and what we want to hear from you all is, thinking of, just kind of take a minute to think about your neighborhood, where you live, your neighbors, what kind of, what are the markets you all visit, what are some of the places you go, if you're religious, where do you go to worship, what are some of your favorite afternoon activities in your neighborhood to do, to really think about, what Chinatown looks like for you, and really thinking about that in how we think about mapping out the neighborhood. So feel free to either chat, put in some of the answers through the chat, or if you can go ahead and unmute yourself. We'll start with the first question here on box number 1 on the left, the gray box, about what is your favorite thing about your community? What are some of the favorite areas, or just in general, what do you consider some of the favorite, your favorite things? Yeah, and as Derek mentioned, there's no need to have to answer in order. If there's another question that you prefer, the next question states, what makes your community unique? Where do you gather, socialize? Where do you access resources or services in your community? And what are the businesses and nonprofits that you support or are involved in your community? Great. So we see King Tom Park as something that makes our the Chinatown community unique. What else? Remember, you all are the experts, so it'd be great to hear from you all, especially me coming from Southern California. So would love to hear from you all.
Yeah, so I put down Pingtown Park to model. So in case you don't know how to use Jamboard, you can double click on these sticky notes that have asterisks, these stars on them, and you can just type in your answer.
Or you can just put in the chat your answer, or unmute and voice your answer, and Derek can or I can put in your answers for you on the Jamboard.
Yeah, so I see through the chat that we see folks like Simon and Serena. Both of you have lived in the area for a long time. Ah, great. Thank you, Simon. Okay, we hear Chinatown Square is a good place to hang out. Yes, the Chinatown Library. Where else? If any of you are parents and have children attending any of the local schools, that's also really important to know. Or if your organization is within Chinatown, it'd be great to name it as well. Okay, so we have Chinatown Library, Chinatown Square, Pingtown Park. Where else? Healthcare, is there local clinics that you all either attend or have family members attend? Architecture, yeah. Are there any museums you can think of? Any historical landmarks that are really important to your neighborhood? I think it's also important to know if you maybe things you also would like to see, right, in Chinatown. I think if there's something that you would wish to see in the area, that's also really important to think about how this redistricting process can kind of lend itself to that, especially when it comes to voting for representation, an alderman that can represent you all, and the concerns that you can bring up would be really good to know as well. So I think Simon wrote Chinatown main entrance should have one at 24th. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? New school. Any mom or pop businesses that you think are really important to think about that are that make Chinatown Chinatown? Okay, got it.
Yep.
Thank you, Alec. I've only
Thanks.
visited Chicago once and Chinatown, so it's great to hear from you all.
Yeah, I think maybe think about, you know, if we are going to create a map of Chinatown, what things are really important to include, which is, you know, that's behind asking this question. What are the important landmarks or organizations or institutions, schools, parks, grocery stores, post office, whatever you can think of, that makes Chinatown Chinatown and need to be included. Caillou, can you elaborate? Are there specific senior housing buildings that you think of as being important and part of Chinatown?
Right, because what I heard is there are currently only 2 like senior housing, right? And they were built like at least 20 years ago. And I know there's a long waiting list of the application. And because I heard many seniors previously they moved to the suburban area for the education of their children, but now they want to move back to Chinatown because of the convenience, right? They like every like market is within walking distance, and Chinatown Square where they can hang out. And yeah, so a lot of seniors want to move back, but they cannot find housing here. So, but usually those seniors, their children can afford to buy them some place to live in the South Loop. But I think it would be better if like nearby Chinatown there is a senior housing so that people can have more options and back to Chinatown. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And Bonnie mentioned nonprofit organizations that make the community unique.
Great. We'll give it a few more minutes, but yes. So continue letting us know, you know, what are the grocery markets you all like to go to? You know, sometimes I have like a Stater Brothers near me, so that's, you know, like my go-to. Is there a go-to market you all like to go to?
I want to clarify again, not what we want to see being introduced in Chinatown, what the needs are. What we're looking for are there existing organizations, landmarks, and so on that you'd like, that you think represent Chinatown? And I think that, you know, because remember, the purpose is to have a map that is representative of the Chinatown and Greater Chinatown area. So if you said Dr. Wang's office must be included in the map, that is what we're looking for. So Pui Tak Center as an important community organization is great. Thanks. Any other things? So we have Pingtong Park, Pui Tak Center, Chinatown Square, Chinatown Library. I see somebody mentioned, I see Chinese American Museum of Chicago, Chinese American Service League. Thanks. Any favorite restaurants? Any favorite places you shop at that you think are representative of Chinatown? Bonnie mentioned Pui Tak Christian School. And thank you, Bonnie, for your leadership of Pui Tak Christian School. Caillou listed CBCC. And, thank you. There's a question for Simon. Are you referring to a specific building? Simon?
Hi, I forget what's the name of the building. It's like usually it's like the church belongs to the church. Right now they have the school over there, and then using the church name is better. Don't using the other name because they have some problem about 10 years ago or something like that. They have to sell the building. The government get the building and then church bought it.
Oh, yeah, that is Pui Tak Center that was
Right.
bought by the Chinese Christian Union Church.
Yeah.
Yep.
That is the old building. That is what building on the
Mhm.
18th, 19th century or something like that. Inside is beautiful. Yeah, inside It's like beautiful. I saw it. It's like, yeah, that's a good way. If you can, they open it. Yeah. And then I believe one of the landmark when you have a headset to go to a walking distance, that is the one of them before. Now I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. And Serena mentioned that it used to be the Online Association building. Yep, that is one of the most iconic buildings in Chinatown. Kai, you mentioned Chinatown Chamber of Commerce. And then we have schools. We have Haynes Elementary School. We have St. Therese Chinese Catholic School.
And then when I mentioned about in the back on the 24th page, because the entry is 21st, and then you say, see you soon. Okay, so I mean, as the people will come back, and then you have some Chinese say over there. Okay, and then every year you have the summer fair. You have to put the sign over there. Nice to have the digital one. Okay, something coming on, so you don't have to put a sign on every year. And then you can put something happen over there, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah, to key that in. Yeah.
Thank you, Simon.
Welcome.
Great. So thank you everyone for incorporating some of the places here in Chinatown. If you all still can, as we're talking through and something comes up that you may not have had chance to write in, please continue to add it to the chat and we'll make sure to come back and incorporate it onto our board. Again, super critical for your input as these maps are drawn to make sure that when these maps are coming out, that they incorporate all these places that are really important to your neighborhood and to Chinatown. So.
All right, thank you, Grace, Karen, and Justin for explaining what redistricting is. Now we're all experts. And what we're focused on right now is the future. Well, the now and then the future. In 2021, right, we're mapping a ward for Chinatown that, you know, represents us more fairly in City Council. So currently, Chinatown is drawn into 2 wards. This northern section is in the 25th ward with Alderman Byron Citro Lopez. This southern section is part of the 11th ward represented by Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson. And as we said before, when you look at the greater Chinatown area, that, you know, of course includes Chinatown, but also Chinese American populations in neighboring areas. You see a lot of us in the 25th, 11th, and also the 12th ward. So with Chinatown being split into 2 or more wards, this impacts how we're represented. With us split this way, we have less Asians in each of these wards than there would be if the community were to stay in one ward together. And a smaller population of us means there's less influence on our elected leaders. Essentially, this means there is less political power to the Chinese American community. What are the benefits of unifying the greater Chinatown area? This would mean we can directly elect an alderperson who knows and fights for issues that matter to our community. This includes greater support for Chinatown Neighborhood High School, as Simon had mentioned, and the other things we also identified as needs, such as senior housing, doctors who speak in Chinese, etc. More funding for necessary resources and services for our communities, such as language access, citizenship classes, senior services, all things that we have mentioned or the things we have mentioned relate to. And another benefit is the active inclusion of our residents in decisions affecting the community. Looking at the Asian American population in Chicago, from the 2020 census, we see that there are more than 189,000 Asians living in Chicago. When you look at the total Chicago population, which is 2.74 million, Asians make up over 7% of the city's population. And we're also the fastest growing race in Chicago, in Illinois, and in the whole country. So when you translate over to the 50 wards, right, the 50 city council seats, at least 3 wards should be representing Asians, but there are 0 Asian majority wards. So I have here on my screen sort of a heat map of the Asian American population in Chicago. Please pay attention to the legend here. This picture is looking just at the Asian American population in the near south side and the loop. You'll see here this little triangle trapezoid shape is where Chinatown is. So you see that there is a lot of Asian population that we can capture and put into a single ward. And so I want to talk about some draft maps that have been produced and released by us as well as another organization. First up is the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission's draft map. This commission is an independent commission that aims to draw fair and equitable districts for all of Chicago. They've drawn draft wards for all 50 wards and have been having public hearings to receive input, which are still ongoing. Currently, this is the ward this is their draft ward of that includes all of Chinatown. That means we are not split like we are currently between the 25th and 11th ward. And this captures a plurality of Asians that are in Chinatown, Armory Square, Bridgeport, and McKinley Park. Before I really go into the stats, I just want to clarify some of these terms. VAP stands for voting age population. This is only referring to those who are 18 years and older. So when I say Asian voting age population, that's the number of Asians in Chicago who are 18 years and older divided by everyone in Chicago who are 18 years and older. CVAP is the citizen voting age population. So that's those who are 18 and older and have citizenship. So again, when I talk about the Asian CVAP, you take the number of Asians who are 18 plus, who are citizens, and divide that by the total number of people in Chicago who are 18 plus and are citizens. So within this red district that the commission has drawn, the Asian population makes up 48.47%. The voting age population for Asians is 48.65%, and the Asian citizen voting age population is 39.27%. And I want to recall what Justin said about each of these 50 wards have to be somewhat equal in population. So that's about 55,000 people in each of these wards, in each of these districts drawn. So we want to avoid trying to, as I showed here in this heat map, right? The reason why we can't, draw a ward that captures all of these red areas is because if we extend any further, then we're grabbing too many people. Next up is one of the draft maps that we at CBCAC have produced. You can look at both of these maps online, actually. The links are on this presentation. But this is one of the drafts we made of a possible district, possible majority Asian American ward that includes Chinatown. So very similar to what the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission made, but we really wanted to make sure we are able to get a majority Asian population in this ward. That's why we're at 51.4%. I don't have data on the voting age population for this district, but the citizen voting age population for Asians, we make up 41.8% of that population. I'm going to take a quick pause right here. Do we have any questions about either of these draft maps? Or any questions about the commission or about CBCAC?
I have a question about the map by CBCAC. So like, well, I mean, I want to know like the relationship between these two maps, like how to proceed, like where will CBCAC drafting the map go, like, because it's a bit different from the Chicago Redistricting Advisory Redistricting Commission, right? So where is the CBCAC drafting map going? And yeah.
Derek, do you want me to take that question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Caillou. So the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission has released a map that includes all 50 wards on September 13th, and they are taking public comments and so on. So if folks have feedback on that map, there's a process to do so, and we will share that at the end of this presentation. This is one draft from CBCAC. It is not anything that we are proposing right this minute. We're looking at it and we are refining. There are, it just shows you one possible way to draw a city ward that is roughly 50,000, roughly 55,000, is actually slightly less than 55,000, but it's basically shows one possible way of drawing a map that is that consists of a ward that is more than 50% Asian American population. And we are, through these meetings, getting input from the public through our own processes. This map has been shared with Chinatown stakeholders and will continue to be shared with Chinatown stakeholders to refine, to see if blocks should be added or taken away before we're ready to present this to city council members as well as publicly. Because remember, at the top of this meeting, the goal is to have a majority Asian American ward be drawn as one of the 50 wards in the proposed City of Chicago map. So there's a little bit of time between now and December 1st, but we need to aggressively work towards that. Does that answer your question, Caillou?
Yes, thank you very much. And I agree with Simon. Good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Caillou.
Yeah.
And thanks, Grace. Really want to stress that we are not finished mapping. We're nowhere done finished mapping. And that's why we're doing this meeting. That's why we're talking to you now, that we want to get feedback on both of these maps, on how a majority Asian American ward that includes Chinatown should look like. So looking back on our discussion earlier with the Jamboard questions, does each map show a ward that includes all of Chinatown? Do the maps include all the locations we mentioned? Are the most important parts of a community included in the maps? We might be thinking about our service providers, our social gathering spots, etc. And how can we make the maps better? So give everyone a few minutes to think about that. When you're ready, feel free to unmute or send any feedback you have in the chat.
May I ask one more question?
Of course, I'll also take questions.
Because I noticed that the 88 marketplace was not included in both of the map, right? And I think they are claiming they are the biggest Chinese supermarket in Chicago. I want to know like why they were not included, or yeah.
So I can answer that for the CBC CMAP. Honestly, my oversight. That's why it's so important that you're here, Caillou, so that you can point out the 88 market. I'm making that note now. Thank you so much. And for everyone, I'll just look up 88 Marketplace on Google Maps just to show where it is in relation to our maps.
It's on Jefferson. It's to the west of the river, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Derek grabbed 88 Marcus location on Google Map. So it's a little bit northwest of where we're drawing. Any other places that you think is important to include? Now the 88 market is very new. They only opened about 6, 8 to 8 months ago.
Right, and I think they are expanding, right? I think they are thinking about redevelop the parking lot across the street. Yeah, so we'll see.
Simon, you have a comment about the White Sox game? Can you clarify? I think.
Oh, just
our-
like
Uh-huh.
when you do something, it's like, oh yeah, after the White Sox game, you can stop by Chinatown. This is a
I see.
commercial, and then yeah, because we're just like you people walking all the time or running something like that.
Yeah. So the CBCC draft map
Just only
does
a mile
include,
from
yeah,
White
the
Sox Park to the
CBCAC
Chinatown.
draft map does
Yeah, they can
include
walk over there.
Sox Park guarantee rate field is in that. Derek, can you point to it? Is in that bottom right corner.
Yeah, I saw it, but the things that have the baseball sign over there, then people will see the White Sox over there. Yeah, just like the map have a restaurant, you have a sign over there. Nice to have a baseball bat over there. And then the other thing is like no, a lot of people doesn't know water taxi can able go to Chinatown for the tour people. Yeah, the water taxi, but the water taxi is only for the summer. It's not for the winter. And then on the 2018 2019, I noticed that they have a police car over there. Just like when you walk out from the water taxi, there are police car over there all the time.
May I ask if the Joby
But not
Art
right now.
Center
Yeah.
is in the drafted map right now?
Joby Center, let's see, it's on 35th and Morgan. So yeah, so good suggestion. Let's see if it is. But yeah, this is why these sessions are valuable. If you can think of places that would be good to be included. That's 35th and Morgan. Yep, so it is within the map.
Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other suggestions, or well, we can gather all your suggestions. And as I said, there are other opportunities to give your feedback as well. And these are definitely drafts to be refined, or this map is definitely a draft to be further refined.
I just want to thank you all for preparing this meeting. I have learned a whole lot. It was very educational and very important for our community. Would the slide presented today be sent to us afterwards?
Yes, the slides will be available to you all.
Thank you.
All right, I have a side-by-side comparison of the CARC map and our draft map. Any last feedback on these two maps before I move on to what are next steps for us? All right, thank you all so much for giving all that valuable feedback. If you have more during this meeting, type it in the chat. If you remember something afterwards, you can email us at info@cbcacchicago.org.
This is Simon. The map on the blue one and the white color street seems I have a hard time to read it. The other side is pretty good. I can see the street side pretty good. Yeah. Okay, so maybe you can pick a different color on the font or something like that. Okay, because it's a hard time for me to look at the street, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we
I'm old
will.
man.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. We can refine that later. Yeah. Mhm.
Maybe because I'm old man, maybe I'm the one that cannot read.
Yeah, we can refine that and make sure the streets are easier to read, the street labels. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. I also posted an interactive map for this. Like the picture I have right now is a screenshot, so you can zoom in and out as much as you like and be able to see the streets more clearly. All right, so what can we all do to ensure that we are fairly represented in City Council when they are doing the redistricting process, when they are redrawing the wards, and how we're represented and how we're drawn into different wards? You can, one, testify. We've got the City Council Rules Committee hearing on September 22nd, 11 a.m. And as I said before, the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission has been hosting public hearings in order to draw their draft map. Their citywide draft map is now open for public comment. And so they're hosting hearings and taking written comments up until October 1st. And you can also contact your local alderperson to support a ward representing Asian Americans. If you need help developing talking points, you can email us at info@cbcacchicago.org, or you can call us at 312-761-9. Ooh, that is not right. I'll give you the right number later, but let us know if you would like to testify at either of these hearings. If I posted a link here for all of the commission's upcoming hearings. So there are dates for the 20th, the 24th, the 28th, the 30th, and the 1st. Some are in person. I believe it's hybrid, so you can join virtually. And some are only virtual options. Do we have any takers for advocating for an Asian American ward? Again, that includes Chinatown, at either of these hearings.
Yeah, I think folks should just email us. The City Council Rules Committee hearing, you have to sign up by the 20th, which is on Monday, in order to have a spot to speak.
Thanks, Grace. So again, let us know if you need any help with that, finding dates, finding any links, or developing talking points. I want to wrap up our session on checking to see how you all better understand redistricting now. So on a scale from 1 to 5, do you understand redistricting better now? So 1 is for I did not learn a thing, and 5 is I learned a lot. Thank you all. I really appreciate seeing the 5s. I'm giving credit to Karen, Grace, and Justin for doing all of the learning pieces.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I also want to put in an additional request if you want to be plugged into the redistricting project. In addition to these specific asks that we have, that you testify at these hearings and talk to your alderman if there are other ways that you would like to contribute and want to learn about how you can contribute. Also send us an email at info@cbcac.org. Just to mention that you want to help with the redistricting project, and then we can discuss how you can help. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. This concludes our meeting today. And if you have any questions or if you want to get plugged in, please do contact us. And the contact information is right here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.